The evening had started like any other, casual, comfortable, and familiar. I had invited my best friend, Mia, over for a few glasses of wine, a dinner I had thrown together with the intention of relaxing. It wasn't a special occasion, just a Wednesday night where I wanted to escape from the mundane routine of work and life. Mia and I had been friends for years, our relationship built on inside jokes and an understanding of the world around us. Nothing was off-limits when it came to humor. We were sitting on the couch, our glasses clinking lightly as we recounted the day's trivialities. Laughter filled the room, the kind that only comes when you're with someone who truly gets you. There was no tension, no underlying discomfort, just two women unwinding after a long week. Our conversation naturally wandered to the latest TV show we'd both been watching. It was one of those silly reality series that played on the drama of relationships. A ridiculous premise, really. But it was the kind of show that made us laugh without thinking too deeply about it. "Can you imagine," I said, sipping my wine, "if someone actually cheated like that on their partner? I mean, seriously, who does that?" Mia laughed, her face lighting up with that knowing look she always gave me when I made a sarcastic comment. "Well, people are idiots, but yeah. It's ridiculous." I smirked. "I don't know, I think I'd just make it known. Like, oh, you want to cheat? Fine, but don't expect me to stick around." Maybe I'd even make a joke about it. I had meant it as a harmless remark, a bit of dark humor to lighten the mood. I wasn't serious, of course. The idea of infidelity seemed absurd to me, an overblown plot device on a TV screen. But I could tell Mia found it funny, even if it was a little uncomfortable. We both had the kind of relationship where we could joke about almost anything without it being taken too seriously. We continued chatting, the conversation drifting to other absurdities in the world of TV relationships. I didn't think much of the words I'd spoken. They were just that, words. A moment of levity in a long, boring evening. But, as it turned out, my husband, Mark, had come home just as I made the joke. He had entered the living room quietly, unnoticed by Mia or me, and overheard the entire exchange. At the time, I had no idea he was even in the room. We had been so caught up in the conversation that his presence didn't register. It wasn't until a few minutes later when he appeared at the doorway, standing there, silent, that I noticed something was off. His expression was unreadable. It wasn't the look of someone who had just walked in on a casual conversation. No, this was different. His face was hard, distant, and something about his posture made my heart skip a beat. "Hey," I said, half standing, smiling awkwardly. "Didn't hear you come in." He didn't respond right away, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Mia, sensing the shift, slowly stood up from the couch, excusing herself with a quiet murmur. I could feel the tension in the room growing, but I had no idea why. Mark didn't acknowledge her departure. His gaze was still locked on me. "What was that you said about cheating?" he asked, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of something darker. I blinked, a knot forming in my stomach. "It was just a joke," I said, laughing it off, trying to ease the growing unease. "You know, just something ridiculous from that show we were watching. We were talking about how insane some of those people are." I didn't mean anything by it. His eyes narrowed, the calmness of his voice a stark contrast to the storm brewing in his demeanor. "It's funny, isn't it? How you think something like that is funny." I frowned, confused by the tone in his voice. "What?" "Mark, it was just a joke. You know that, right? We were just talking. I didn't mean anything personal by it." He took a step toward me, and I immediately regretted not reading the room earlier. "Funny," he repeated, almost under his breath, as if the words were taking on a new meaning the more he spoke them. You think it's funny to joke about something like that when we've built a life together? Something so disrespectful. I felt a chill settle over me. What are you talking about? I asked, feeling the sudden weight of his words sinking in. His gaze faltered for a moment, a brief flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, but it was gone just as quickly as it had appeared. I think you've crossed a line, and you don't even see it. But it's clear to me now, isn't it? I could feel my heart racing, a mix of confusion and rising panic filling my chest. What are you saying, Mark? You're blowing this way out of proportion. He didn't respond immediately, his jaw tightening as if he were holding something back. He stepped closer, his hand digging into his pocket. And then, without another word, he pulled out a thick envelope and handed it to me. I stared at it, unsure of what I was looking at. Divorce papers, he said, his voice flat. I think we need to call it what it is. The words didn't immediately register. Divorce. It didn't make sense. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. The entire room felt as if it had shrunk, the air thick with disbelief. I looked at him, still holding the papers, my mind racing. Mark, what are you talking about? This is insane. You can't be serious. His face softened, but only for a moment. I'm dead serious, he said, his voice trembling slightly with emotion. You've made it clear where your priorities are, and I can't pretend I didn't hear you. I couldn't breathe. It was a joke, Mark. A stupid, offhand remark. That's all it was. You're really going to end everything over this? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned and walked toward the door. I can't do this anymore, he said over his shoulder, his voice barely above a whisper. And just like that, he was gone. I stood frozen, the divorce papers in my hands. What had just happened? How had a simple, thoughtless joke turned into this? The silence in the house was deafening. I stood there, the divorce papers in my hand, still trying to process what had just happened. Mark had left. He had walked out the door, leaving me standing in the middle of our living room, utterly blindsided. I kept staring at the envelope, trying to make sense of it. How had things gone from laughter and casual conversation to divorce in the span of just a few moments? I felt the weight of the papers, but they didn't make the situation any clearer. I wanted to scream, to throw them across the room, to demand that Mark come back and explain himself. But he was gone, and I was left here, alone with the ghost of a joke I never thought would go this far. I slowly sat down on the couch, trying to steady my breathing. My mind was racing, each thought colliding with the next. How could Mark, the man I had shared my life with, the one I thought I knew better than anyone, react this way over something so trivial? It didn't make sense. This wasn't like him. We had been through tough times before, but we always came out the other side stronger. Or at least, that's what I thought. I grabbed my phone, fingers trembling as I typed out a message to Mia. I needed someone to talk to, someone who could help me understand. She responded almost immediately, and I quickly dialed her number, desperate for any kind of reassurance. Mia, I said when she picked up, my voice breaking. You won't believe what just happened. What? What's wrong? She asked, her voice full of concern. It's Mark, I choked out. I made that joke tonight, the one about cheating. I didn't think anything of it, but he overheard, and he handed me divorce papers. He's gone. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Mia breathing, but she didn't say anything right away. Finally, she spoke. Wait. He left? Just like that? Yeah, I whispered, unable to hold back the tears that had started to form in my eyes. I don't get it, Mia. It was just a joke. A stupid joke. Why would he leave over something like that? Look, Mia said slowly, her voice calming. You know I love you, right? But, you have to admit, that's not exactly something you just say lightly. I mean, sure, it was probably meant to be funny, but you can't deny that there's a lot of tension in what you said. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. I didn't mean it like that. It wasn't serious. We were just talking. We joke about everything. It's not like I was accusing him of anything. I get that, she replied. But maybe he's been feeling something deeper for a while. Maybe this is just the straw that broke the camel's back. I closed my eyes, trying to process her words. It didn't make sense. Mark had always been secure in our relationship. Or, at least, that's what I thought. He had never given me a reason to believe that there was doubt between us. We had our ups and downs, sure, but what couple didn't? But this? This felt like a complete overreaction, like he had been carrying something for a long time and had finally snapped. Mia, I don't know what to do, I said, my voice small now. I need to talk to him. I need to understand why he's doing this. What's really going on? You have to give him some space first, she advised gently. I know it's hard, but you can't just force him to talk. Let him come to you when he's ready. I sighed, knowing she was right, but that didn't make it any easier. How could I just sit here, waiting for him to decide to come back? The thought of him walking away without even giving me a chance to explain, it was unbearable. I needed answers, and I needed them now. We talked for a little longer, Mia trying her best to calm me down and remind me that things weren't always as they seemed. But her words were distant, almost like they weren't sinking in. I was too consumed by the chaos in my mind, too lost in the confusion to hear her clearly. I just kept thinking about Mark, about the hurt in his eyes, about the way he had looked at me like I had betrayed him in some unspeakable way. It was too much to comprehend. After I hung up with Mia, I tried to focus on something, anything, other than the mess my life had become. I wandered aimlessly around the house, my feet barely touching the ground as I moved from room to room. Everything felt off. It was like I was living in a foreign place, a house that wasn't mine anymore. I found myself in the kitchen, staring blankly at the counter. I knew I should eat something, but the thought of food made me feel sick. Instead, I grabbed a glass of water and leaned against the sink, trying to steady my racing thoughts. What was I supposed to do now? Should I call him? Should I apologize, even though I didn't think I'd done anything wrong? I had no idea where to start. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that something had been wrong for a while, something beneath the surface that I hadn't seen. Mark had been distant recently, but I had chalked it up to the stress of work, to the little things that always seem to get in the way of a perfect life. But this? This wasn't about a joke. This was about something deeper. I just didn't know what. I grabbed my phone again, scrolling through our texts. They were normal, mundane, even. There was nothing that stood out as a red flag, no cryptic messages or signs of trouble. But then again, if I had missed something, if I hadn't been paying attention to the signs, I didn't know how to make sense of it now. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's face, the hurt, the anger, the disappointment. It was like a constant loop, playing in my head over and over again. How had we come to this? How had a simple joke turned into a night of pain and confusion? The house felt cold, emptier than I'd ever known it to be. I was alone, and I didn't know how to fix it. The days after Mark left felt like they were stretching on forever. Each one seemed to blur into the next, a series of monotonous hours spent replaying that conversation, those divorce papers, over and over again in my mind. I kept trying to convince myself that it was all just a misunderstanding, a horrible moment of miscommunication that would eventually blow over. But deep down, I knew that this wasn't just about the joke anymore. Something deeper, something unspoken, was simmering beneath the surface. I spent most of the next few days at home, pacing the house, unable to sit still. There was a constant knot in my stomach, an overwhelming feeling of anxiety that I couldn't shake. I kept thinking about Mark, about his coldness when he left, and how he hadn't looked back even once. I wanted to believe that he just needed space, that this was just a knee-jerk reaction to something small, something fixable. But every time I tried to call him, to reach out, my calls went unanswered. His voicemail was always full. And it hurt. I had spent hours trying to make sense of what had happened. I replayed every conversation we'd had over the last few months, looking for signs of something, anything, that would explain this. There had been moments, now that I thought about it, when I could sense that Mark was distant, but I had brushed it off as nothing. Work stress, life stress. We all had it, right? Little things here and there, offhand comments, awkward silences, times when his mind seemed elsewhere, but I never thought it was something to worry about. I assumed that all relationships went through these phases. But now, looking back, it seemed as though those moments had been red flags. Maybe they were signs of something bigger that I had ignored, or worse, dismissed as unimportant. I thought about his reaction when he heard me make that joke. It wasn't just surprise or mild annoyance. It was as if I had touched on something deeply personal, something that had been festering inside him for a long time. I couldn't help but wonder if there was something about me that had been bothering him for months, something that had built up, piece by piece, until that one offhand comment sent him over the edge. I decided to go through some of our old photos and messages, looking for any clue that could help me understand. There had to be something, some hidden message in a photo, a forgotten conversation, that would make it all click. But everything I found just made me more confused. Our wedding photos. Vacation pictures. Messages of love and affection. Nothing stood out. Nothing seemed out of place. But then I found something. It was an old letter, tucked away in one of the drawers where we kept our important documents. I had almost forgotten about it. It was from one of Mark's ex-girlfriends, someone he had been involved with before we met. I remember him talking about her in passing once or twice, but it was always with a sense of detachment, as if she was a footnote in his past. I never thought much about her, after all, he and I had built something real together. But now, holding that letter in my hands, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The words were simple enough, nothing too personal or intimate. Just a letter thanking him for a recent visit, some small talk about catching up, and a few words about the good old days. But there was something about it. Something in the way it was written that made me feel uneasy. The realization hit me hard. Could Mark have been carrying unresolved feelings from his past? Had this ex-girlfriend never really been gone from his heart, from his thoughts? Was that why he had been distant lately, why he had reacted the way he did when I made that joke? I didn't know, but the thought gnawed at me. I tried to dismiss it, tried to tell myself it was just an old letter, something insignificant. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had something to do with everything that was happening now. I spent the next few hours sitting on the couch, staring at the letter, lost in thought. I thought about calling Mark, confronting him, asking him point-blank what was going on. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. What if he told me something I wasn't ready to hear? What if I learned that he had been holding on to something, some unresolved emotion, that he hadn't shared with me? What if the truth was even worse than I feared? Instead, I spent my time replaying our last conversation. I remembered the look in his eyes when he handed me those divorce papers, the way his voice had trembled slightly as he told me he couldn't do this anymore. What had happened to the man I had married? Where had that warmth gone? I tried to picture the man I had known for so many years, the man who had once made me feel safe and loved. But now, all I could see was a stranger. As the evening wore on, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the silence. The house felt emptier than it had ever felt before. I missed him, but I wasn't sure if it was the man he was now or the man I had imagined him to be. I wasn't even sure if I knew who he was anymore. I spent the night lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. I had so many questions, so many things I didn't understand. Why had he reacted so strongly? Why hadn't he given me a chance to explain? What was really going on beneath the surface? And most of all, why hadn't I seen any of this coming? The next morning, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of waiting for Mark to come back to me, I would go to him. I would give him the space he clearly needed, but I wouldn't just sit idly by. I had to understand what was happening. I needed to know if there was still hope for us, or if this was truly the end. I wasn't going to let him slip away without a fight, even if it meant confronting some uncomfortable truths. I grabbed my phone, typed out a message, and hit send. I need to talk. Can we meet? The message was simple. Direct. No excuses, no apologies, just a request for a conversation. Now, all I could do was wait. I waited for hours, staring at my phone, hoping for a response. I couldn't focus on anything else. Every time it buzzed, my heart skipped a beat, only for me to find out it was a message from someone else, something unrelated. I kept refreshing my inbox, trying to remind myself that patience was key, but the anticipation was unbearable. I needed to know what Mark was thinking, whether he would even consider speaking to me, or if I was just wasting my time. It was late afternoon when he finally replied. A simple text, just 4 words, "I'll meet you tonight." I felt a rush of relief and dread at the same time. He agreed to meet, but what would that meeting be like? Would he explain himself, or was this just the beginning of the end? I didn't waste time. I quickly texted him back, asking where and when. His reply was brief, the park at 7. That was it. No explanation, no sentiment, just a clear, matter-of-fact response. The next couple of hours felt like they dragged on forever. I couldn't decide what to wear, what to say, how to act. I felt like I was walking into some kind of emotional battlefield, but I knew I had to face whatever was coming. The anxiety was overwhelming, my stomach in knots, but I told myself that this was the only chance I had to fix things. I needed answers. I needed to know if there was a chance for us or if we were truly done. At 6:45, I left the house. The drive to the park felt endless, the minutes ticking by slower than I ever thought possible. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw him. Mark was standing by the bench near the pond, his back to me. He looked the same, but somehow different, distant, guarded. I took a deep breath and walked towards him, trying to steady my nerves. When he heard my footsteps, he turned around, his face unreadable. For a moment, neither of us said anything. We just stood there, looking at each other, the silence thick and uncomfortable. Finally, I broke the silence. "Mark," I said, my voice tentative. I don't even know where to start. What happened? Why did you leave? Why, the divorce papers? He didn't respond right away. He just stared at me, as if weighing whether or not to speak. I could see the anger still simmering beneath his calm exterior, but there was something else too, hurt. Deep, raw hurt that I didn't know how to address. You really don't get it, do you? Mark said, his voice quiet but firm. That joke, it wasn't just a joke. You don't understand how much it hurt me. It wasn't just something funny you said in passing. It was the way you said it, the way you laughed. It made me feel like I was the punchline, like I was the joke. I swallowed, trying to keep my emotions in check. Mark, I swear I didn't mean it like that. It was just a joke. I didn't think it would upset you like this. He shook his head, his jaw clenched. You don't understand. You don't know how long I've been feeling this way. It's not just about that joke. It's about everything. The way you've treated me, the way you've treated our relationship. Do you even see it? My heart started to pound as his words hit me like a slap in the face. What do you mean? I don't understand. I thought we were fine. I thought we were happy. We were happy, for a while, he said, his voice hard now. But somewhere along the way, I started to feel like I was invisible to you. Like I didn't matter. You were so focused on everything else, your career, your friends, your life, that I started to feel like I was just a background character in your story. I froze, the weight of his words sinking in. It was like a punch to my stomach. Mark, I never meant for you to feel like that. I never wanted you to feel invisible. You thought what? He interrupted, his voice rising. That I would just be okay with everything? That I would always be here, silently supporting you while you ignored me? I tried to be patient. I tried to be understanding. But I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I felt the tears welling up in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I didn't know, Mark. I didn't realize how you felt. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to make you feel that way. Mark looked away, running a hand through his hair. You didn't know because you were too busy with everything else. I've tried to talk to you about this before, but you never heard me. You never saw what I was going through. His words stung, and I felt my heart break a little more with each one. He was right. I had been so wrapped up in my own world, my own issues, that I hadn't noticed the signs. I hadn't seen the cracks forming in our relationship, and now they were too deep to ignore. I never meant to hurt you, Mark, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I love you. I never wanted to make you feel like you didn't matter. Mark's face softened, but the anger was still there. Love isn't enough, you know? It's not enough to just say the words. It's about showing it. It's about making the effort. I don't know if I can keep doing this anymore. I don't know if I can keep waiting for you to notice me. I felt a lump form in my throat, a mixture of guilt and sadness overwhelming me. I understand, I said quietly. I get it now. I'm sorry. I've been so selfish. I didn't see what was right in front of me. I didn't see how much you were hurting. For a moment, Mark didn't say anything. We just stood there, the distance between us feeling wider than it ever had before. I wanted to reach out, to touch him, but I knew it wouldn't fix anything. It wasn't enough anymore. Finally, Mark spoke again, his voice low and resigned. I don't know where we go from here, but I can't pretend anymore. I need space. I need time to figure this out. I nodded, the tears I had been holding back finally spilling over. I understand. Take all the time you need. But please, Mark, don't give up on us. Please don't let this be the end. He turned away, walking towards his car without looking back. I stood there, frozen in place, as the realization hit me. I didn't know if we could come back from this. I didn't know if there was anything left to save. But as I watched him drive away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was already too late.